Take money out of the equation, and I think there are two things you need to do before you die. 1, go on a safari in Africa, and 2, go on an expedition to Antarctica. I know these things are special because no matter how many times I'm lucky enough to do them, I don't take them for granted. I'm on my way to Antarctica again. This time, we've chartered an entire expedition ship, and there's a whole lot of epic stuff incoming. But first, today's video is sponsored by Squarespace.com. Squarespace is an amazing place for photographers and bloggers to build a really professional looking website really quickly and easily. It has a lot of templates that make it simple to get started. You have great resources too, like members only areas, easy to build stores for selling arts and even services. Of course, there's also lots of other great tools for creators such as a logo maker and in-depth analytics. So if you're looking for a photography website or portfolio, head to squarespace.com/BrendanVanson for a 10% discount on your first purchase. Link in the description. So this might seem a little bit random, but I'm on a boat. I'm on a ship. This is the Beagle Channel, and we're on our way to Antarctica. I said it might feel a little bit random, because I didn't show the whole journey here, but for me this is not random. This is the long time coming. We planned this expedition 3 years ago, but because of delays, because of the pandemic, it hasn't happened until now. But on board this ship, there are 8 other pro photographers that I brought along, and there's like 80 other incredible photographers that have joined the expedition to Antarctica. And there's going to be awesome things to see. But I need to say that because I'm working and because I've organized this whole thing, and because there's going to be a lot of work keeping things organized, I'm not going to be doing a lot of piece to camera vlogging this trip. I think it's going to be more B-roll and storytelling, voiceover on top of the journey. But I think the journey is going to be awesome. We're on the Beagle Channel now, and we're heading on to the Drake Passage. We passed through the Beagle Channel and then rode the swell of the Drake Passage to the Antarctic Peninsula. It's one of those journeys that leaves people feeling fragile and off-centered, but also desperately excited. The journey makes that moment when you finally see land again even more rewarding. But I don't really want to talk about the journey on today's video. I want to focus on my new obsession, environmental wildlife portraits. In my years coming to Antarctica, I've learned one really important thing. Penguins are awesome. Glaciers and mountains are awesome too. Penguins and glaciers and mountains are awesome-er? What's going on, guys? I am back from Antarctica. I'm gonna take those off because they look silly on me. I'm back from Antarctica, and I didn't film actually anything in Antarctica at all. Greg shot some footage. I shot some B-roll. And I didn't vlog anything. Now, the reason I didn't do that, as I think I might have explained in the intro, although it was months ago and I can't remember, is that I had a lot of responsibility on this trip. Basically, I was in charge of a ship. And yeah, I wasn't in charge of the ship. Obviously, there was a captain, there was an expedition team, but I was kind of responsible for a lot of the things going on. So I didn't want to be focused on the wrong things. And I felt like at the end of it all, I could come and just sit in front of the camera and talk to you guys about it and share some images. And that's what I'm gonna do. So on the rest of the episode, I kind of want to talk about my love for environmental portraits. And what's an environmental portrait? I'm gonna show a photo right now with you guys. That's kind of an environmental portrait. An environmental portrait is a portrait either of people or wildlife that shows the subject within its natural environment. So with people, that might be a carpenter, but not just, the headshot of a carpenter, but a carpenter in their workshop. With wildlife, that's an animal in nature, in the wild, surrounded by the elements of their nature. Over the years, I've found myself falling in love with wildlife photography, but particularly wildlife environmental portraiture. I absolutely love it. I've become obsessed with it. The first time I went to Antarctica was back in 2011, I believe, maybe 2010. And when I did, my whole goal was getting as close to the faces and animals as I possibly could. I wanted as much of that animal to film the frame as possible. As a result, I got about 10,000 different photos of penguins, well, of their heads. And although I like a couple of them, for the most part, they're kind of lacking that impact. For the record, I feel the same about human portraits. Yes, absolutely, there are some incredible portraits of people. The sheer skill of portrait photographers who are able to light, stage, and create images of people's faces or bodies in studios, or the field, impresses me beyond belief. But I don't want to showcase just the animal. To me, that animal could be anywhere. So over the past couple of seconds, you've been seeing some of these portraits of wildlife from my first trip to Antarctica over 10 years ago. Honestly, many of them could be taken in a zoo. But one doesn't have to cross the Drake Passage to take images that could have been made in the zoo. When I got home, I found a couple images that also included the landscape. Those 2 or 3 were my favorites, not the 1,000 where I got really close to the penguin. Now, you're seeing a couple images from last year's voyage. The impact of seeing wildlife in their environment adds so many more layers to a photo story. Back then, I wasn't a good enough photographer to understand what I was doing. I was just framing up images and hoping they came out well. But it's why it's really important to go back and look at your old images and kind of decide what you like and what you don't like. So when I went back to Antarctica in 2021, I had it in my mind that I really wanted to start taking a lot of environmental portraits. That I wanted to capture penguins and seals and birds in that environment. That's the photo I wanted. But when I got to Antarctica, the weather wasn't on our side. We didn't get great weather. And also, I just got so excited about everything that I kind of forgot my goals. But on this past year's trip, I decided to really focus in on that. In fact, I almost became obsessed. In fact, it almost became a problem in that I only wanted to take photos of animals if there was a beautiful environment behind them. I became so obsessed with wildlife environmental portraiture that if there was an animal, the most epic animal I'd ever seen, I wouldn't have really photographed it unless there was a cool environment around it. So, yes, I became obsessed with it. But also, I think that the images are really powerful. So, on today's episode, I kind of just want to talk about the 3 reasons why you should include the environment in your wildlife photography. And maybe this goes beyond wildlife photography, but to all types of portraiture photography. I think the lesson's the same. The first reason is, I don't know how to describe this reason. It's kind of like fine art versus travel. In landscape photography, there are 2 prominent niches, fine art and travel. With fine art landscape photography, the subject could literally be anywhere in the world. It's a beautiful landscape, it's a powerful photo, but there's nothing that defines the location. With travel photography, there's always the goal of showcasing the destination. It's a beautiful landscape, it's a powerful image. And there's always something that gives away its location. The goal of a travel photo is to make people say, I want to go there. It's the same with wildlife. As I mentioned earlier, you can make beautiful portraits of penguins in a zoo. But if you include that epic landscape around the penguin, all of a sudden people start thinking, OMG, I want to go to Antarctica. Environmental portraits add the quote-unquote where to an image. It leads the viewer to want to go stand in the place the image was taken to experience that world. It evokes adventure. It adds a location and some connection to the destination. The second reason is probably also pretty obvious, but it's scale. Including an animal in your frame is almost like the little person, big landscape trend in landscape photography years ago. By putting an animal in your frame, it allows you to show how big that environment is. Adding a landscape into a wildlife photo makes people feel your image. It allows them to feel the connection to the location. It makes them understand and relate to the image. Scale is important because it provides context to the situation. Now, that's not to say that without scale you don't have a good image. Most of my favorite wildlife photos have absolutely no scale. In fact, quite the opposite. I like to minimize the scene, get low, and make the animal feel massive. But that's a different purpose. That's the purpose of making the animal feel majestic. By using the animal as scale, you're making the landscape feel majestic. Essentially, you're shifting the importance of the subject from the animal to the landscape. In a weird way, when you use an animal in your frame like this, you're shifting from wildlife photography to landscape photography. So, I'm going to show you two images right now. One of those images is more my fine art photography style of wildlife photography. In this image, I got low to the ground, even lower than eye level. I used snow kind of as a foreground bokeh, and the penguin looks massive. But there's absolutely no way to get scale. There's no way for you, the viewer, to know how big or small that penguin is. And then the second image with the penguins in the nature, you can kind of get a sense of scale. There's other things around it and makes you understand how big or small the penguin is and how big or small the landscape is. And then the third and final reason I think is also important, not from an art standpoint, but from an environmental standpoint. I think that it is so important to include the nature within your wildlife photography to remind people, and maybe yourself as well, that these animals need the environment to exist. I'll never forget doing wildlife photography with Morten Hilmer. He said to me that he didn't even really love photography. He loved animals. He used photography as a means of conservation. By photographing wildlife, it would potentially lead people to appreciate not just his photos, but the animals as well, and maybe protect them. I think if you love nature, you want to include that nature too. It almost takes the photography from wildlife photography to nature conservancy photography. Your images are no longer about the animals, it's about the nature the animal requires to thrive. Including the landscapes into your wildlife photography is a form of environmentalism. It's a means of reminding the viewers that for these beautiful animals to exist, they need the wild. They need the glaciers. They need the sea ice. They need the clean oceans. By doing environmental wildlife portraits, you're showing the world the way it needs to be for the wildlife to thrive. So in the words of the great Forrest Gump, that's all I've got to say about that. I absolutely loved this trip to Antarctica. We didn't have the perfect weather, but we got incredibly lucky with our wildlife sightings. We saw an emperor penguin. We saw loads of humpbacks. We saw minkies. We just had an absolutely incredible time, and the wildlife was out in full force, and I definitely got some environmental portraits of the wildlife in Antarctica. And like I said, I think I actually became obsessed with it. In fact, I think it was a bit of a problem. In fact, I think I'm gonna make a video about the problem I had in Antarctica and all the mistakes I made in photography down there on the next one. I'll see you there. Peace.